There we go. And we're live. It's 8:02. Welcome to the Sports Therapy Association podcast. If you're listening to the audio on podcast, then this is actually recorded live on YouTube. If you didn't know that and you want to join us for the live recording, then just head over to the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel every Tuesday at 8 o'clock UK time, and you can watch the video being recorded, which I often recommend. I mean, I understand a lot of people have got other things to do with their Tuesday evenings at 8 o'clock. But if you want to come and ask our guests questions directly and kind of network with other soft tissue therapists and learn a little bit about the Sports Therapy Association, then you're welcome to join us. Just head over to YouTube. But if you don't and you just prefer to listen to the audio, then that's great as well. But I would request that you, if you do enjoy what we do, then just leave a little, well, I say little, leave 5 stars, go the whole way, and maybe a review as well, because it helps us appear higher in the Google rankings and just helps spread the word of our good guests. So that'd be really great. Anyway, so we are continuing. We're part 3 of the month's focus on the foot and ankle. It's been a fantastic month so far. Thank you as always to people who have emailed in. We started off with a look at foot anatomy. I don't know what that is, foot anatomy. And then we moved on last week to looking at plantar fasciitis, or is it, with Ian Griffiths and Maddie Tate. That's definitely generated some interest and a few questions, which is always good. And then tonight we're going to be looking at the evolving foot. Why are we looking at the evolution of the foot? Because, well, I'll leave that up to my guest to say. I'm not going to tell you why. Before we do that, if you do want to catch up with us, then obviously all you need to do is head over to the YouTube channel. Let's put that a little bit bigger so you can see it. Head over to the YouTube channel and you'll see all of our episodes, as well as the WIST episodes, the Women in Sports Therapy podcast. They're up there as well. They're on number 4 at the moment. I think number 5 is being recorded. Or like I say, you can go to any podcast app. If you go to the STA109.co.uk, then you can click on the links there. Isn't that handy? I've put on a little link for Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. I've put a link for Pocket Casts if you're using Android. There are other ones available. And whichever you do, then let other people know about it, share it. Like I say, last week, thanks again to Ian Griffiths and Maddie Tate. Great episode. That's all up there and available to watch and listen to. But we are moving now on to a reminder that in my mind, that works so well. It looks like something out of Sky News, doesn't it? But anyway, COVID-19, rising cases. It's true. We mustn't forget about it. I did a little reminder at the end of the show last Tuesday, that cases are on the rise. So make sure everybody, but particularly STA members, that you are doing proper risk assessments, that you are being responsible, looking after yourself and looking after your patients. If you've got any questions at all, then obviously contact your STA regional rep, or you can email admin@thesta.co.uk if you're not quite sure what you need to be doing or where you stand. Okay, so that's said and done. Very important stuff. So moving on tonight, very excited. James Earls and Lucy Wintle are going to be joining me very shortly. James Earls has been requested quite a few times, actually. I should do like almost a Top Gear kind of board, shouldn't I, of the number of times people request. But James Earls is definitely up there, and rightfully so, with a fantastic history of books, which we'll be mentioning shortly. Lucy Wintle is the co-author, contributor to Understanding the Human Foot, which is what we're going to be kind of talking about tonight. So I hope everybody is happy. I always say it, ask and I shall deliver. If there's somebody particularly you want on the show, then I will do my very best to bring them on to entertain you and educate you with their wonderful word. People are joining us in the live lounge. As always, if you have joined us live, I can bring your comment up onto the screen. So Gary Benson, founder of the STA, is in here tonight saying, "Evening, everyone. Looking forward to this one. Hope you're staying cool in this heat." It is very hot, isn't it? But I'm not going to complain about that. Nikki Mansfield, hi, Gary. Evening all, sticky in it in true Nikki Mansfield style. And then Catherine Reimer's also in here. People are coming in. So if you do like joining us live, then think about it. You don't have to come every Thursday, every Tuesday, but it's nice networking. Catherine Reimer says, "Hi everyone. Hi Gary. I'm not used to this weather. I'm glad I was at work most of the day." Catherine, you love your work. That's why you're glad you're at work. Anyway, so there we go. That is enough of the housekeeping. So what I think we should do now is bring up our guests, James Earls and Lucy Wintle. Hey, James. Hey, Lucy.
Hiya.
Hi, Matt. Good evening.
How are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us. We've had a little chat off air, actually, because we're all very organised, weren't we? It feels like I've been speaking already. You've already dropped some fantastic information for me, which I'm going to have to ask about again. But I do appreciate you giving us up your time. Lucy, you're in Canterbury, aren't you? We were talking about Canterbury.
I am in Canterbury. Yeah, it's just gently boiling away in the east of the county here.
How? Because you are at Canterbury Pilates. You're the owner and founder of that. Is that affected by the weather? Do you find people not quite turning up as much as
very definitely? Yeah, no, I think it's probably not a good idea to come for an hour to Pilates and just go home feeling worse than when you came in the door. So yeah, the mat work classes have been knocked on the head this week. It's not applicable.
Whereas if you did Pilates in James Earls's air-conditioned house, then that would be fine.
You would be fine. You would be fine. I'm not jealous.
No, not at all.
Sadly, it's not the whole house. It's just the bedrooms.
Not the whole.
So my apologies.
People listen to the podcast, you can't see this. It's another reason why you should try and come along to the YouTube recording. But if you just imagine in your mind a man who is well air conditioned and just sitting back with a perfect body temperature in this heat, and that is Mr. James Earls here in the studio tonight. So there we go. Right, guys. So the evolving foot. Very excited about this. Obviously, we mentioned a copy here. That's going to be a little bit weird. Can't quite see it on the camera, but the evolving foot. There we go. Understanding the human foot, rather. Fantastic book. Released last year, I think.
It was.
Was it? Yeah. Lucy, contributor. Fantastic. I mean, I've already talked to you, little James, about this, but I mean, I'm a total geek when it comes to anatomy books. And I teach it myself. And I'm not just saying it because you're on screen and I feel guilty otherwise, but it's really, and I know this is your intention, it's really laid out in that midpoint between being too basic, so you're not really getting enough information, and too complicated where it just looks yawn. And you've hit that middle, the way it's designed, look, the images, the photos, and of course your writing style. A great book. And if anyone listening in the lounge has, I know a few of you have already read it and have got it, but feel free to leave some comments here if you want to congratulate the authors themselves, then that'd be great. Has it met with the acclaimed success which you hope and expected?
Thankfully, it has. We had a very nice review in Podiatry today, I think it was. So I'm always a little bit nervous of it going across into other professions, because I'm not a podiatrist. I'm not a specialist on foot. So to have it read, reviewed, and then the review published in a professional journal was like, that was a little bit kind of nerve-wracking, but it was a very, very pleasant, very nice, good review. So yeah, we were happy.
So modest to make it sound like it was a little experiment you wrote from your bedroom, but in actual fact, it's not the first book you've released, and people will know you maybe even more for. Let's bring up a little bit of picture here. When I put this on full screen, we'll still be able to hear you both, so don't worry if you can't see yourselves anymore. Look at that little thing I put together. I can send you the slide if you want. So I know that people in the STA have read Born to Walk. A lot of you, when you mentioned me one, James, Born to Walk came up, but then also you're well known for the Fascial release for structural balance, written with Tom Myers. So much so that was actually I found on Amazon. I found it in German, I found it in Dutch, and I found it in, what was the other one? German, Dutch, and Spanish, of course. Inducción Myofascial, Equilibrio Structural. So yeah, very successful books, a long history to you, and I'm springing this on you. It wasn't kind of set up, but people, if you are interested, and I'm getting no commission out of this, but there is a James Earls Collection 2-book set now available on Amazon, which I think is just again, I'm trying not to sound like a shopping channel here, but you can get both of them for $23.99. If you're going on a holiday, which I know a few of you probably are, and you're looking for books to take with you, then there you go, bam, $23.99, and you've got more than enough to entertain you round the pool. So yeah, I thought that was an amazing deal, which I had to share. We're going to be talking mainly about this one, understanding the human foot. There you go, a picture of you, both of you on there. What was it like contributing to that? How did you meet, Lucy? How did you share time with this man and then end up contributing?
I met James when I went on the structural integration course, probably about 10 years ago. And I then sort of tapped into several of the courses that he was doing, and my training kind of veered off into a myofascial stream. So I went and did a lot more movement, myofascial work for movement therapists rather than for a massage therapist. So I'm not, although I do and can do massage therapy, I much more approach my work from a movement perspective. So that's how I met James. And then I think maybe a year ago, he said to me one day, would you like to do a chapter in my new book? And I was like, oh, I'd love to. I don't know enough. I don't know enough. What am I going to do? Help. So, but I realized that what I had to do was draw on my wealth of experience of teaching and actually seeing people who come through the door, and how to take a lot of the stuff that's written in the anatomy books and James's books and just apply it to everyday people and exercises which everybody can do without making it too complicated.
That's lovely. It's lovely to hear that initially, even somebody with the amount of experience and the years, which I think we're talking about a couple of decades now, aren't we, of Pilates?
Yeah, about 22, 23. Yes.
There we go.
That makes me sound old, don't say that.
Well, I know, I never know whether to say that or not, but yeah, the fact is, yeah, all that experience and yet still you're kind of clenching your knuckles and thinking, oh my God, how can I do that? But yeah, wealth of experience. And in Pilates as well, I mean, we've had, what was the name? Rafi Bender came on of the Elephant Pilates podcast, who talked a lot about how Pilates has changed and how contemporary Pilates isn't really contemporary anymore, even though it's kind of taken the name. And so you've had to see a lot of changes. And did what you learned from James kind of help you evolve as a Pilates teacher as well?
I definitely started to look at the body in a very different way. I think possibly my training initially and my teaching up to that point had been maybe quite isolated and stilted, and wasn't integrated. And knowing what I knew from the structural integration course and looking at things from a very tensegrity point of view changed everything I did. and I just became also much more aware of the fact that lying my clients down on a mat for 60 minutes wasn't really going to help their functional ability through their foot, using gravity, using ground reaction force. So it's kind of interesting to see once you bring people onto their feet, if they're very strong in other areas, how they just can't balance and they can't stand on one foot. So that's the bottom line. I'm afraid to say that it is very obvious that a lot of people find that very, very challenging. So that's when I started to rewind and go off on a different tack.
This is all music to your ears, isn't it, James? This is like exactly what you want to do.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for springing all those slides on me. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's wonderful. So I can trump Lucy. I've been doing it for even longer than Lucy. So this is my 30th year. This is my kind of anniversary. So it's likewise, it's been a kind of evolution for me through my career of I started with the aromatherapy massage, and then got frustrated by the limitations of that. I started adding more remedial work, and then got involved with the structural integration, the anatomy training school. And then thankfully I was introduced to the Gray Institute and functional movement. And for me, that was the perfect blend of being able to kind of take the myofascial vocabulary and kind of the understanding the structure and the depth of anatomy that Tom Myers would teach, and then to see it in a different context with the Gary Gray, the functional approach. And he just took, to my mind, what many people talk about in terms of tensegrity to kind of into the real world. It's like, wow, that actually makes sense of anatomy. It's like it's in context. And that was really when I started kind of thinking, getting frustrated. I did the gift training with him, and I had so many moments of anger and frustration and disappointment of why the hell had it taken me 20 years to hear some of these stories and some of this approach to anatomy. And I'm not alone in not having heard these stories. So that's where I try to place myself in that kind of that, as you mentioned at the start, the middle point between the dry, detailed anatomy and the kind of the very loose. Let's just go and move and play, which kind of happens sometimes in certainly in some areas of my world, and trying to interpret and put things in context and make things as understandable as possible, rather than I'm sure you were taught initially way back in the day, anatomy you just have to keep learning these, just keep memorizing, and eventually somehow you will accumulate the knowledge that you'll understand how the body works. I think it's been my frustration of I just think we teach anatomy in the wrong direction. We try to understand the whole try to understand the whole body by accumulating the bits. It's like, well, if I'm my first day in anatomy class, I don't know anatomy, but I know what my body can do, and I can see what other people can do. And I'm rambling on, but I think it was in the first of this series with Dr. Carley and Nick Knight. I just on a side, such a cool name, like Nick Knight. I was like, it's just like a superhero. You just see him kind of going off into the telephone box and coming up with his underwear and lycra. It's like, I think that's so cool. Anyway, what was I talking about? Yeah, I just think if we start with what we know of the body, and then we can add in the bits, we can add and build the context. And so that's what I try to do with the book, and what I'm trying to do with my teaching.
So it's very successful. No, that's fine. No, it's very successful. And John W. here, again, if it's the podcast, then I'll read out the comments that people who joined us live are leaving with. John W. says, all mine are well thumbed and referenced. He's referring to your books, I'm sure. Gave me a new look on muscle function from a movement perspective. And also, who else did I see? Nikki Mansfield said, I love the foot book, which shall now be referred to forever. I refer to it way more than I expected when I'm with and writing up my clients. I love that because, again, I'm hoping that some people listening to the podcast are thinking she looks at books while she's with clients. But that's another thing about anatomy, which I try and let my students know is, yeah, you have to pass exams and tick some boxes and get your certificate, but there's absolutely nothing wrong in front of a client of referring to a book, is there, when you're kind of looking at something and showing them something? And I think your book's a perfect example of that. If you were trying to show a diagram or check something out, no harm in that at all. We're not walking dictionaries and encyclopedias. We have to mesmerize everything. And it would be impossible to do that for the human body anyway. So talking of the book, before I forget, Mr. Gary can't stop giving things away and emptying money out of my wallet is now saying this. We are sending out 3 copies of Understanding the Human Foot to lucky members who won last week's prize draw. Exciting. So there we go. Thanks, Gary, as always. And don't forget, if you are interested, if you listen to the podcast and you want to get Understanding the Human Foot and Born to Walk together, then just do a little search in Amazon.co.uk. There's a great deal going down. Right. I've got some questions here. Nikki Mansfield has said, woo, 30th anniversary party round, James. There we go. Not that Nikki drinks, obviously. Right, so let's have a little look at... she's bound to have. So let's talk about the evolving foot. In your book, I mean, there's a fantastic introduction, and then there's a whole chapter on the evolving foot. Is it a case that, and this goes to both of you, so feel free to chime in whenever, does understanding how humans have evolved and the foot has evolved help the clinician understand the foot and therefore have a knock-on effect to what we're doing in clinic?
Obviously, I would say yes. I think in our profession, we learn the details, and they're absolutely necessary. We learn the tests, we learn this. And I tell a story of I was at a conference about 4 or 5 years ago in Copenhagen, and 3 or 4 presenters were on before me, and to the audience went, we don't want to look at all the detail. If it was someone with a shoulder problem, a knee problem, whatever, it's like, well, I'm not interested in just that. I want to get to the cause. I need to see the rest of the body. I need to get to the true cause, as opposed to just the symptoms and just the area that's kind of under threat. And the audience were excited. It's like, yes, absolutely, tensegrity approach and kind of functional approach and understanding the body, and yes. And that story kind of went on through with different presenters for the first day. And the second day, the same presenter turned up and went, okay, so now let's look at the SI joint. Let's look at all of the tests for the SI joint, and let's look at all of the assessments and then the treatments and all of the differential diagnosis of the SI joint. Like, well, hold on, to me, weren't you listening to yourself yesterday about the connection and the interaction? And to me, it's a lack of resources that we don't have of the ability to see the interactions. So to jump back to something that Dr. Emma Carley mentioned, she mentioned 3 of the kind of major things that changes the evolution of the foot. One of the main things was the adducted big toe. So other apes and other primates, monkeys as well, have an opposable big toe. They can grasp things, and for some reason, ours is straight. It's all 5 toes are pretty much in line, and if just saying that that's just a fact. It's like, well, oh, okay. But for me, it's the interesting bit gets to the why and so what. And to me, well, that brings not just all of the toe joints, the metatarsal phalangeal joints, in line with more or less with one another, but it brings them in line with the talar joint. Also brings them in line, plus or minus, with the knee joint. Also brings them in line with the front of the hip and all of the stable, strong structures that are there. And then there's also not just the change in alignment, but it's also the increase in the range of motion. So we can roll through our foot relatively straight into that toe-off position. And as we progress into that extension, we've had movement through the talar joint. We've had an easy movement through the knee, and we've had an easy movement that helps to load the structures at the front of the foot, front of the hip. And so it's not just, I know I wrote a book about the foot, but it's not just the foot. The forces that will be received by each of those other joints are somewhat dependent on the alignment of the big toe. And unless we kind of gone through the story, it's just another fact. It's like, well, why do we walk the way that we walk compared to other primates? It's like, for me, I learn a deeper appreciation, therefore a deeper understanding of the foot, of our structure, our anatomy, and why my client might be coming with just a repeated grumble around the front of the hip. It's like, well, if I just keep looking at the front of the hip and doing all of my wonderful assessments by the front of the hip, if I don't know that actually we have an aligned big toe, then I'm not necessarily going to think, well, I need to check toe extension, perhaps.
I think that's quite important from a teaching point of view as well. You're asking people to do an exercise, for example, which involves toe extension, telling them the story of why that's important, what that relates to, why that might affect their gait, why if they've got stiff hips, they might want to look at their big toe, and how you build up the story within a class, starting at a basic level and then increasing the intensity of the exercise to see where their tolerance level is or what works and what doesn't. But it's always, I think, and I think I've learned that very much from James, it's about the story. So the story that you're telling them and the story that they are feeling and the journey they're going on through that sort of essentials event journey.
It's very interesting. And that's the style that the book and books, looking at both of them that I've read, are written in. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you say, like, for most people, the story is the way to help someone understand and appreciate, and they're going to go home and do the exercises you're suggesting because they get it. But when we go to traditional teaching, no storytelling. No. You're going to hit them with a really long Latin word. You're going to start learning all these bits, divide it down, say what's rubbing against what and why it's not working, and then give them some exercises thinking, they're bound to do these exercises now. Explain to them that it's a problem with this and that. But as kids, we grow up learning things from stories, don't we? It's the best way. It's play and story, isn't it, to make an adult, even an adult, appreciate what's going on. So why?
Play and story. It's also having a comparison. And so for me, the anatomy that I suffered through in my teaching or my receiving of teaching was just, these are the facts, these are the facts, these are the facts. Like, so if I try to use, and this kind of evolutionary anatomy for me is really comparative anatomy. If I have something to compare it to, so if you know, just looking even at the tibia and fibula of a chimp and compare to a human, it's like, well, it gives me another story. It gives me another hook. It gives me an appreciation of that. Oh, we are arranged this way because we can do this and we can't do something else that a chimp does. And it just helps my appreciation of form. I start seeing the whole, all of our anatomy, all of our body in a better, more functional kind of light.
Beautiful. Don't forget, people, asking questions if you want to. I'm keeping my eye open. I often forget about you guys who've joined us in the live lounge. If you've got any questions, feel free to send them through. Okay, so we got like non-opposable big toes. Let's not call it a hallux or anything. Let's just call it a big toe. Let's have another one. Give me another one. Something else looking at the evolution of the foot, which is significant and again might form a nice story to help our clients appreciate what could be going on if they come to us with an issue.
One of them is, it was a bit of a theme in the book as well, is the tibial torsion. So if you compare, so it's a you know, hopefully many people are familiar with tibial torsion assessment. It's just checking the number of degrees between the two malleoli. We have a laterally rotated tibia relative to all of the other primates. You go, well, okay, but so what? It's like, well, the lateral rotation of the tibia, and so if you're familiar with the idea of tibial torsion, and well, if some people are more laterally rotated, they're more likely to have a more supinated type foot. And if people are less torsioned, they have a more neutral kind of measurement between the two malleoli, then they're more prone towards a pronated type foot. And that helps us also think about the way in which the tibia fibula rotate during movement. So lateral rotation of the tibia and fibula, so lateral rotation of the leg, is related to supination, or that creation of the rigid lever or the toe off position, and a medial rotation is more related to a pronated foot. And so, well, if the primates have a more medially rotated tibia, then that's obviously that they're going to have a flatter foot. So one of the other things, one of the other three that Dr. Colley mentioned was the increased arch height. But, well, we have an arched, domed foot. We also have a laterally torsioned tibia. But, well, laterally torsioned tibia leads to supination, and supination is an increase in arch height, or however you want to word it. So again, it just helps to tie up the stories and see the linkages.
Very nice. I'm just taking that all in. Lucy, feel free to jump in if it goes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think also from a movement perspective, and a lot of Pilates teachers probably will be using equipment such as reformers, etc., but always looking for that rotations in the bones and what the bones are doing, just not thinking purely muscle, but looking at the interaction of the bones and where you think the bone should be, and chasing it up or down the line to see what else it's referring to. So just I like that whole story of the bony rhythms and what the bones are doing when I'm teaching, and quite often cueing that, turning in within movement, trying to encourage that.
Yeah, and because as soon as we start getting the tibial torsion story, we go, okay, well, the tibial torsion, that's a structural story, but suddenly we can actually just, well, you don't have to torsion your tibia. We can't do that consciously. But if we're turning laterally, then what effect, and that's that turn, it's common. I use an exercise for most conferences and presentations, looking at your right hand and turning to the right and watching your hand as it turns, and you'll feel your left foot pronates, your right foot supinates. And there's a hardwired reason for that. It's in the anatomy, but it's a surprise to most people. It's like, oh, hold on, if I'm retracting my right shoulder, it's like suddenly my right foot is supinating, my left foot is pronating. And we can even play with anatomy games and go, well, how did you retract your shoulder? Well, rhomboids, middle trapezius. It's like, yeah, So middle trapezius and rhomboids, or spinal rotators, spinal extensors, medial and lateral rotators of your hips, the medial and lateral rotators of your knee, and the pronators and supinators of your feet. And this is the for me, this is the reality of the body. And so again, we just kind of start building up from just those building blocks of, okay, well, let's compare a chimpanzee and a human tibial torsion. You know, you've got clinical assessment, but it's also then kind of, it gives me the hooks to go, oh, okay, now I understand function. So I know that if I'm turning one tibia laterally, that associated foot will supinate. If I'm turning one tibia medially, then that associated foot will hopefully go into pronation.
Can I just add a little story there to that. But for James, when I first met him, we were in a room doing that exercise where we were turning to the right, and he said, "Oh, I can tell exactly in this room who the Pilates teachers are, because everybody was keeping their pelvis still. So everybody was fixated with pelvic stability and just moving their upper body instead of integrating the movement. So it was like, oh, yes, rewind, rewire, do the exercise and actually feel it travel through the body properly." So it was a bit of a moment.
He called you out, did he? He pointed over in your direction, and you're all the Pilates teachers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's just testimony, isn't it? We mentioned a little bit of this off air. It's fine to change stuff, isn't it? I mean, a lot of things, especially when you're looking at like 5, 10, 15, 20 years in our cases of knowledge that we were given. I think it's important. This has been a common theme with evolving as a therapist. We're not necessarily throwing everything, well, we're not at all throwing everything we've learned out whatsoever. It's just gently tweaking, isn't it? Like you say, not fixating so much on keeping that neutral pelvis whilst you're moving the upper torso anymore, allowing a little bit of movement and realizing that could be stability. And have you in your careers, and I think, have you in your careers ever felt a little bit of fear when you've been told something that has challenged what you've told patients, or maybe even presented in conferences, and you thought, I've got to change that now. How am I going to do that? Or maybe you've even written something, and then you're thinking, I've got to tweak this. I've got to change it. How are people going to accept me if I'm changing my mind? Has that been something that you've both experienced?
Yes, definitely. Yes, I think anybody who said no to that would be possibly telling an untruth. But yes, there's so much information, isn't there, that you have to choose how you use it. And I've had no qualms in going back into my classes and saying, okay, we're going to approach this in a different way. I might not do it straight in one big piece, but I might drip feed it in so they're not completely aware of the massive changes. But yeah, I think it's very important to be honest and to realize that you're on an ever evolving learning journey.
And how do you think your class respond? Because a lot of therapists, it's kind of one-on-one, but you're talking about going in and maybe saying it to 20 people at the same time.
So it's I think I have recently completely changed the way I work in some of my mat work classes. I would say probably in an hour's class, 35 minutes, sometimes 40 minutes are standing, using various props and things, bits and pieces to improve balance and foot support. And I had to drip feed that in slowly. But actually, do you know what? I haven't lost anybody and I've gained more people. So the realization for them is that they are stronger, more stable, it's more beneficial and it's functional and they love it. So yeah, I think you just have to tell them the truth, really.
Fantastic. And James, you were smiling from ear to ear when I questioned whether you've had to kind of go back and change anything you've ever said.
Yes, there's probably a first book that could do with another revision that claimed that one could change a lot of structural and postural issues with a little bit of faffing about with soft tissue. Some of that has been rightfully challenged, and also my thinking, my approach has moved on from that, but it's still out there and it's still selling some copies and it's still keeping the publisher kind of ticking over. And if it was my preference, I would probably retire that title.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was that. So that, yes, in terms of the kind of embarrassing things that one might have said, And then there's also the pleasant surprises. So in doing some research, it was actually after I'd finished the understanding the foot book, and I was like, oh, I should check, is there anything new that I can add to the story about toe extension and the relationship to the front of the hip? And I came across for me a new muscle, and I was almost looking at exactly the question that I was asking. It's like the relationship of toe extension and what can happen at the hip. And they went, well, actually, it makes a difference. The iliocapsularis. I was reading the paper and I'm like, what? I've never heard of the iliocapsularis. And it's a tiny little muscle. It's inside within the anterior ligaments, the capsule of the hip joint.
Oh, we lost. Okay, so just lost James temporarily. His internet.
Probably the air conditioning, something to do with the air conditioning.
Yeah, you can't do both. You can't have an internet connection.
Can't have air conditioning and be successful.
Let's bring James back. James, we lost you for a second. I don't know whether you realised that. I think it's
I did. I saw myself disappear. I was like, often.
We weren't rude about you.
No, we didn't say anything.
So
you're still discovering stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So the iliocapsularis was a new one to me, and they were saying that, well, if with altering the amount of regular kind of hip extension, change the cross-sectional area percentage between the iliocapsularis and the rectus femoris, and there was a relationship between the dysfunctional hips and an increase in the cross-sectional area of iliocapsularis. And it hasn't yet evolved, as far as I can see in the literature, in terms of being able to kind of hone down into absolute cause and what to do about it. But it's like, well, it's interesting to be able to see that, there are muscles that we haven't yet discovered, or different ways in doing the dissection and thinking about the body or thinking about the tissues, and also then that crossover into anatomy to function, which isn't always the way that we teach. And that was very much in part of the papers that we're reading. It's like, it's a functional problem.
Very interesting. Yeah, so I mean, I like to think we're living in a time now where there's actually admiration for people who have visibly evolved, like yourself. I mean, at the time when you were involved in the first book, it was like great stuff. It was like what was out there, and you're, one of the people who were helping disseminate that information to everybody. And there was nothing really out there to challenge it. Well, it was a little bit of stuff on Soma Simple, but no one was. Just a few people shouting at you. So I think I'm hoping that for people like yourself, and I'm thinking of maybe Walt Fritz and other people we've had on the show, it's not a total U-turn. It's just, what, we've looked at a few things and maybe we can't do maybe what we thought was happening when we did this wasn't quite happening. It's something else involved here with there's some other stuff. But it's very rarely just throwing everything out, is it? It's just you're going to put more weight on other things you do. So it's healthy.
It is.
Definitely.
Going back to the book, I was interested in, you had a lot of information on bones and shapes of bones. I think it's always interesting, again, when I'm teaching anatomy, you give the kind of 5 types of bones, and you introduce the sesamoid bone and all that, and then you go into long bones and short bones, and aren't these nice and happy, and everything's, then there's the irregular bone, anything that's kind of a weird shape, and then you come to the tarsals, it's like, what are these then? And you're like, well, that's interesting. So kind of, again, is that testimony to the complexity of the foot, that kind of like it's difficult to name them all, and they are very much different shapes.
Yes, and there are different shapes, and what I try to do in the book is try and make sense of all of the funky names and all of the varied vocabularies that we use. Is it midfoot, rear foot? Is it tarsal? Is it mid tarsal? Is it forefoot? And it's just it's a mess because there's very little consistency. And even sometimes within a paper and within a book, they chop and change between one convention to the next. And to me, it's no wonder that people get confused. So what I do try to do is kind of break it down again, try to deliberately use as many of the vocabularies as possible. There's different ways in which you can break up the foot, and try to understand why is the cuboid called the cuboid? Because it's cuboid. It's kind of like a cube. It's kind of like, it's the early dice. Why are the cuneiforms called cuneiforms? Well, it's because they were kind of triangular, like the cuneiform writing of the Babylonians and Phoenicians. So, making those connections actually, even to me, it's like, why are the metatarsals called the metatarsals? Well, because everything on the other side of them are the tarsals, and meta just means beyond. So the metatarsals are just the bones that are beyond the tarsals. And to me, once you start to understand and break down the Latin, which is always a little kind of nervous making, it's like, well, actually, there's a reason for it. There's a meaning. There's a connection. Tibia just means flute. Fibula is a brooch pin, because it's the early brooches, the pins were just chicken bones, chicken fibula, and that's why if you ever eat the chicken leg, sometimes you get that really pointed pin-like bone. It's a chicken fibula.
Oh my god!
It's a brooch pin. So again, so it's not just evolution of the foot; it's also evolution of the etymology. Why are things given these names? And that makes sense. And a lot of them are named because of their shape, because of their form. And so having that connection, it's like, well, again, Dr. M. Colley was talking about the domed arrangement of the foot. Well, that happens because of that cuneiform arrangement. It's like, well, you've got those kind of wedges, those kind of triangular line of the three cuneiforms. And then you've got the lateral longitudinal arch. Well, that's kind of the stable bit. It's like, well, it's stable. It's like, well, why? Do you want a kind of wobbly triangle, or do you want a kind of stable square bone? It's like, yeah, let's stick a cuboid there. We heel strike. Well, let's stick on the calcaneus, the most robust, most dense bone of the foot. Is there? So again, just making the stories, having as many stories as possible makes a little bit more sense and gives us more hooks to go, now I can actually understand, as opposed to just that rote learning. You got 14 phalanges and 2 sesamoids, and you've got 5 metatarsals. And that, it was, again, in the first podcast, we were talking about the joke between, is it 26 bones or 28 bones of feet? It irritated me that the publisher put that on I think it was on the back cover. I was like, that's anathema to me. It's like, that gives me nothing. I don't care how many bloody bones there are in the foot. That doesn't give me any kind of hook, any kind of appreciation, anything. It's like, big deal. I can drop that in the next conversation and put it on social media. It's like, yeah, it's a wonder of engineering. Look, it's got 26 bones and 30 million joints and 120 bloody whatever soft tissues. And it's like, pointless. So, sorry, off on a rant again.
That's fine. You let it out. It's good. It's kind of therapy for you. You need to get it off your chest. We haven't had closure yet, I don't think. What about, I'm interested in, so evolution of the shape of the bones. How has the foot evolved in terms of the shape of bones when we did at whatever point decide to stand up for whatever reason? Is there evidence of how things have changed in order to accommodate that?
There's kind of, in some ways there's a lot and not a lot. So in the literature, there's a lot of literature. And in terms of actual physical evidence and remnants, fossils, there's actually very little. For a number of reasons. One, they're difficult to find. It's difficult to actually create a fossil. And also, I'm sorry for the image, but the hands and the feet are the least fond of any of the bones because they're the most easily predated. So anything that comes along to have a chomp tends to take the mobile bits. And also, when we get to the small bones, then it can be more difficult to more difficult to find, but also more difficult to differentiate in trying to see it between, well, is this a pebble or is it a cuneiform? Is it a phalange? I don't know. It just looks like a bit of dust. Okay. So yes, there's a lot of discussion, and the remnants that we do have, the fossil remains that we do have, do show kind of the story that Dr. Colley alluded to, the increase in the robustness of the calcaneus, which shows more of a heel strike. Okay. The alignment of the big toe. This is where I actually have to then think about the 2 feet, because it's that alignment of the toe, big toe, and its range of motion actually allows me to heel strike on the forward foot. So the two changes have to kind of go together. So it's kind of the change in the left foot helps the change in the right foot. So we do see something of a progression of the hallux adducting, the increase in the robusticity of the calcaneus, because it's dealing with more shock. It's also supporting more of an arch through I prefer to talk about the half dome arrangement of the foot, because of the lateral rotation of the tibia, the torsion of the tibia. So all of those changes are happening gradually as a suite. There's a suite of changes, or a group of changes, and it's all seen relatively smoothly through the remains. Yes, there are gaps and questions and frustrations, but yeah, the evidence is pretty much there. And especially when we get to, so some people might be familiar with the Australopithecus, it's not until we get to Homo erectus that we get really kind of a recognizable modern arrangement, and that's a modern foot. And that's particularly important because it's also a modern foot with a longer waist. And it's the mobility of the waist that allows us to start walking and particularly running more efficiently. Mm-hmm. And for Dan Lieberman, so the barefoot professor in Harvard, he was one of the main references for Born to Run by Chris McDougall. So one of his big points is that we then took off as running man and woman person rather than walking person. So we start to see much more progression of the foot for running. So we start getting shorter toes, which has no benefit, they say, in terms of efficiency for walking, but has a significant benefit for running. Mm-hmm. And we get a longer waist. We also get more development of the external occipital protuberance and the ligamentum nuchae at the back of the head for that deceleration, not just with the nodding, but mm-hmm. also that deceleration of the running. So all of this kind of has to happen together, and it's one of the frustrations of kind of limited time. Of, well, we want to talk about the foot, but actually we can't really understand the foot if we don't understand the rest of the form, the rest of the structure. It all has to be seen in context.
This is fine. This is great. And I've mentioned this a couple of times on live videos because I had this idea, and the idea has already started, of the focus subject of the month. We've had the foot, and then in August, after a couple of weeks with Mike Grice, it's going to be the knee, focusing on the knee, and then we'll do some on the hip, lower back. I'm going to work my way up the body. But I was conscious that I'm kind of like doing the human body a disservice by breaking it down into these individual body parts. But so far, the message has been exactly what you've said. Everybody who's come and has said, yeah, we can look at that part, but we've got to look at the rest of the body, and not even just the rest of the body. We've got to look at the psychosocial factors, and the mind and the brain and everything like that as well. So even though we are splitting these months into different parts of the body, it's lovely that you say this message, that it's very difficult just to isolate on one part of the body, because you're going to miss everything else, aren't you? Lucy, I'm interested with Pilates. You mentioned you've got people standing much more up in class. I've always associated Pilates with some wonderful language and use of language and metaphors and imagery to help people kind of experiment and feel. Is there anything that you kind of use, or you've seen work with some people with regards to appreciating using?
I would say I'm definitely an imagery person, and I use that an awful lot I talk an awful lot in my classes, I think that. So yeah, I'm continuously trying to look at what's working and what's not, and give people an image if it's helpful to them. Obviously, people learn in very, very different ways, and that's a completely different subject. But yeah, I think it's you have to cater again in that class situation. You're going to have someone who will respond to your imagery. Somebody will have not a clue. Somebody will just be looking at you visually and just watching what you do all the time. So it's just you have to be all things to all people, really. So, but yeah, I think traditionally there has been a lot of images to do with pelvis and yeah, but use what works for you and what works for your clients. I think that's the bottom line there.
I think it's one of the nicest things that I've personally benefited from spending time with Pilates teachers. And I used to teach a lot of exercise classes, and a lot of the other teachers of Pilates. And even though back then it was kind of like, imagine there's a bit of string on the inside of your belly button and you're putting it in, that was kind of the classic. But it was just one of the things I learned from the Pilates teachers I hang around is how well, it's storytelling again. It's getting somebody to get it by using an external cue, maybe if you can, and just that image. I mean, with the foot, I'm thinking of maybe like the 3 points of contact sort of thing, or stopping people from scrunching their toes. That was all different ways of doing it, isn't there?
Yeah, and also use of massively with the foot, use of props. Mm-hmm. So use of small balls, use of spiky balls, use of little wedges to stop somebody pronating quite so much if you want to drive their knee into a different position. Just being creative and giving people a different sensory story, really. So I do use an awful lot of stuff in my classes.
I think it's good. And I think I've benefited in being a soft tissue therapist of using that imagery, because it's education at the end of the day, isn't it? Doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're working with people, then you need to know how to get that information across and communicate. So I think the imagery is really useful for soft tissue therapists as well. We've got some questions coming in, if that's okay with you. I think Nikki Mansfield has been right on one. Geez, let me just scroll back 50 comments. Thanks, Nikki. Let's have a look. So sarcastic. I'm sorry, Nikki. Nikki Mansfield says, I've remembered anatomy so much more easily since learning why the bits and pieces are called what they are. Give me a story any day. Thank you, Nikki. I have a non-bone related question. Here we go. Let's bring this up on the screen. So Nikki says, thinking of the importance of ground reaction force and providing energy for our plantar tissue to spring us forwards on toe off, are Crocs and Skechers the most evil of all the tiny foot coffins? Okay, so getting into the crutch of it, suitable footwear. There is a chapter in your book, isn't there, James, which you call Design. What was it? I forgot what it's called now. You probably don't know.
Design for living.
Yeah, it was really nice because it's not obvious from that it's about shoes, and it was the last one in the book. But yeah, really nice chapter, which I recommend people have a look at. But yeah, different types of shoes. Okay, so Nikki's mentioned that Crocs and Skechers might be something to do with coffins. Yeah, the worst of the coffins.
So I agree with that. Sorry, yes.
Okay,
sorry, you go, Jane.
Yes. So to some extent, I both agree and disagree. I think scanning down some of the other comments, if I understand the form and if I understand the function, then any kind of change in the environment, so the kind of tools that you use, they just become environmental tweaks, and they can be either good or bad depending on the client that I'm seeing at the time. So if somebody has an arthritis, if somebody has a hallux rigidus, especially if there's kind of arthritis in there, if there's a bunion, if there's some kind of pathology, then I can change the environment to offload that area to actually give it some comfort. Whether that's permanent or hopefully temporary, then that's fine. If it's a full-on kind of, okay, this is what I've done every day of my life because I just like Crocs and Skechers, then yeah, maybe we need to think about that, because they are designed to kind of offload. They're designed to feel comfortable. They're squidgy. They do absorb some of the shock. I was like, well, the shock absorption can actually be a feature that I want for a client in dysfunction pain. And it can also be, well, once they're beyond that, I need to kind of maybe reduce it. Or if somebody is having other problems and that I maybe think I can tie up to a weakened foot so they don't have the intrinsic muscle strength or whatever it may be, then I might say, yeah, let's look at kind of getting rid of those and getting into something else that will allow your foot to move and be exposed to some of those forces. So some of those ground reaction forces are necessary to load for the efficiency, particularly of running, less so with walking, but also we need to be able to get into toe extension in order to capture some of that energy. Some of the shoes don't let us get into toe extension because they do the job for us because of that kind of toe spring arrangement. So to me, they're all neutral, provided I understand the client that's presenting to me. So they all have features that I can apply, I can tweak, I can reference or refer in or out, depending if I understand the system and understand those forces and how all of the form will adapt in that environment.
That's a great answer. You got to come back now, Lucy, and say, yes, I agree. They're the devil's spawn.
No. Well,
how do you follow that?
I'm a barefoot shoe person as much as possible. Having said that, I have got 3 pairs of Birkenstocks just over there, which I won't admit to wearing very much. But no, I because I'm teaching a lot form and function of the foot and trying to increase toe strength and toe extension. I like people to be able to feel that. But obviously, if I know that it's contraindicated, if I know that they've got pins in their feet, or that I would say no, not for you. But I do encourage the use of that, and I just think it's a completely different walking experience when you have a pair of something with minimal support on. It's a sort of true experience. But I wouldn't just launch somebody straight into that. I would try and prepare their foot before. With exercise, prepare their foot before they get to that stage.
It's a good answer as well. Yeah, no, it's great. So basically the message is it depends on the person and what, if they're injured, what stage of the injury they are. And I think it was Craig Payne, co-presenter of PodChat Live with Ian Griffiths from last week. He said different shoes will do different things to different people at different times. It's kind of like Catherine Reimer said here. She just slapped Nikki around the face and went, well, I love my Crocs. They help with my arthritis in my feet. So Nikki, what are you going to say now? You're going to tell Catherine that she's not experiencing kind of alleviation through wearing her Crocs? Tricky, isn't it? Different people, different times. But yeah, but I get what you say about if in a healthy individual who you're trying to increase their ability to perform maybe and introduce variable input and challenges, then it makes sense, doesn't it? Minimal
I think increase their awareness of what their foot is doing at any given time. Can you feel your big toe? Can you feel how the strength of your big toe might increase your stride length or might make things easier for you to walk by extend, no, not if it's stuffed in a pair of shoes that don't move.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because as always in our industry, the pendulum can swing too far the other way. And I noticed that in the book, Catherine, it wasn't you who wrote it, James, you were talking about how some people, the pendulum swings so far that people are trying to walk on tiptoe. They're trying to kind of avoid the heel strike for walking as well, because they know that, well, when most people run or change direction quickly, they kind of move to their toes. So that must be the best way of doing everything. But it was interesting what you said about that in the book. If you could expand on that point.
Did I? So again, it's understanding the forces. So, and to my mind, so there was one guy in particular, German, slightly strange presentation. I mean, he was like, "Oh, I will prove to you that we are designed to 4-foot strike," and his proof went along the lines of, "Well, stand, step to the right, back, step to the left, step behind you. What did you do? You 4-foot strike. So therefore, I have proven my case. We should all 4-foot strike." That's a different movement. That's not walking. And there was another guy who's like, "Oh, I've done my research, and everyone in medieval times was walking with a 4-foot strike, and I have been." He dressed up in medieval garb, and yes, look at me. I used to have, and so my apologies for the sexist language. I'm paraphrasing him, but he said, "I used to have the calves of a girl, but now, after 3 months of 4-foot striking, I have big manly calves." Like, well, yeah, that's because you're doing an exercise. You've changed the way in which you're moving, and you're 4-foot striking, so you're having to work through gastroc and soleus and not everything else, all of the plantar flexors to help decelerate your dorsiflexion, so your muscles are working. And the fact that your muscles are working and building kind of, to me, just kind of rings bells of, well, that's, to me, in my mind, that's inefficient. If your muscles are having to work that hard to do something that we're actually, I would argue, evolved to do very efficiently with a minimal muscular input, because we want to minimize the muscular input because we want to maximize our calorie intake and minimize the calorie output for movement. So it just doesn't make sense that we would use a lot of soft tissue on a lot of small bones when we could use, well, predominantly that strong, thick fat pad and a strong, robust calcaneus with a, well, aligned big toe that allows us to have the range to give us a long stride with a heel strike. So it's, for me, it's always, I go back to, let's look at the form and how that feeds into our function. is there an easy, efficient answer? And usually, so it's kind of Occam's razor. It's the fewest steps in any kind of argument is usually the right one. Well, to me, it just doesn't hold up, the 4-foot strike as a walking strategy. It works for many people in a running strategy. It's raining here.
Yeah, they predicted it here as well. Yeah, well, that's a whole hour of chat, isn't it? Another chat about when it comes to running. But again, well, no, I'd love to go down that with you guys. We'll have to do a part 2 some point. I'm just itching now to talk about 4-foot running, but no, not at all. But yeah, so it's just a warning, isn't it? The pendulum can swing too far. It still hurts me when I see people walking around the street with no shoes on, personally, and normally, I don't know, I don't want to generalize, but I can tell from their facial hair and what they're carrying that they're doing it because, they feel that this is what we did millions of years ago. So that must have been best. It's kind of like the antiquated fallacy in that if we used to do it, then we should be doing it now. But I'm just waiting to step on a bit of glass or dog poo, or it doesn't make sense, or pick up some nasty disease. I'm sorry, but we're not
blood poisoning. Yeah,
the planes we walk along now are, the pavements at Church Square are not quite the same as the planes of Africa or somewhere. It's just
agree. Yeah.
But anyway,
so my last response is, to me, if we understand the form and how it functions, then we can have health beliefs that are based on an understanding rather than on a faith, on an expectation, on that naturalistic fallacy that you mentioned. It's like just because they were doing it millions of years ago and we've evolved to do it, therefore it must be right. Well, actually, there are things that we're doing better. There are things that we're doing much worse. So, and maybe Skechers or a normal healthy foot is not better, but there's certainly a useful tool for a dysfunctional foot to offload it.
There's we've reached like 9:04 now. I'm conscious I'm already keeping you past the allotted time, but there's so much information in understanding the human foot about. Can I make it appear on the camera, or is it? There we go. Can't see a little bit of it. There we go. About footwear and thoughts, and again, it's presented not in a you must do this or you mustn't do this. It's just presented in a really wonderful, educative way to make you think, and I think that is something that can be passed on to your clients as well. It's not a black and white kind of like Haynes manual of how to work with the foot, because we're human beings, we're not cars, so it's not all about the same mechanics. So wonderful book. So any questions we haven't managed to cover today, if you're listening to the podcast or watching it, then I encourage you that you have a look at Understand the Human Foot, produced by these fantastic people with information from James Earls and Lucy Wintle. They called you Whittle, sorry, Wintle. So nice. We've run out of time. I'm sorry about that. It seems like, as always, we've got so much we could talk about. I just noticed Anna Maria's in the house, Anna Maria Mazzieri, which has reminded me. Thanks for Anna. You just prompted me fantastically. James, first, you've got some touring you're doing, aren't you? You've got some courses coming up, and I believe
I have a course coming up with Anna Maria in November. I was doing a workshop we call Born to Move, which is functional manual therapy. So it's all manual therapy in standing with movement. So it is both kind of assessment, treatment, education, exploration, and learning of functional anatomy all at the same time, with minimal theory and pretty much all practical. So we're doing that with Anna Maria down in Bristol in November.
Fantastic.
Yep.
We'll make sure that everything that's mentioned now is in the show notes. So keep talking, but just in case you're there trying to scribble things down, don't worry, it will all be in the show notes.
And my other colleague, Owen Lewis, is running a workshop in North London in September and October called Move to Integrate, which is his take on kind of a blending between the functional manual therapy that we do and the work that he's done with Diane Lee. So very, very precise, very, very rigorous, well thought through assessment procedure that's very kind of both functional movement, integrity kind of friendly, and very clinical friendly. If you're familiar with Diane Lee's work, it's fantastic. Certainly recommend that. And then myself and two other colleagues, two personal trainers, we run Evolution 101. We have a summit coming up in November that's kind of part sponsored by Born to Move, and that'll be at Regent's University in Regent's Park on November the 15th, and it's called Mind and Movement Matters. We have quite a few interesting, really excellent speakers. I'm looking forward to that.
That sounds very good. Fantastic. Well, those three, we'll make sure the dates and everything are in the show notes. If you want to see the show notes, people, if you listen to this, then head along either to the sta.co.uk. All the episodes with the show notes and details and links are put on the STA website, so the sta.co.uk, or they also appear at Podbean, who host this podcast. You can find them on either of those. And I try and copy and paste them into YouTube as well. Might not be there straight away, but I do copy them eventually to YouTube. Thank you for those. And Lucy, what have you got coming up?
I have a wealth of information on my website. So I have a video library. All the book exercises have been filmed, and they are within the membership area on the website. There's also a brand called Hexology, which I'm developing, which deals more with aging and the prevention of foot weakness and everything associated with not getting old. So trying to prevent muscle loss, taking action now before it gets too late, really, but also really focusing on balance and feet first. So just programming that into almost everything that I do.
Fantastic. So people listening to the podcast, you won't have seen, but I'll just put it up on the screen once more. If you go to canterburypilates.co.uk, that's Lucy's website. There's a whole load of information on there to do with classes, obviously, and then feet first, hexology. Let me remind me, we talked a little bit of that off air.
Yeah,
what that was about. What's that?
Kind of blending together everything that I now know and do. So 6 pillars: Pilates, wellness, feet first, and balance, muscle mass. So a lot of trying to encourage people to use weights. A lot of people in Pilates won't use weights. They're nervous of weights. They don't like working with big fat dumbbells, but trying to encourage them to really improve their muscle mass, because there's a massive drop off, as we start to age. So it's being aware really of the things that you do now and their importance for 20 years time. So taking action now rather than leaving it till it's too late.
Sounds fantastic. There we go. So yeah, host of information on that website. Again, the links will be on the show notes. Okay, so that's it, people. Thank you so much for joining us live. Just before you go, just to let you know, next week, we haven't got another guest. We're going to have a little recap over the 3 episodes we've had. That'll be quite a regular feature, I think, rather than just filling you with information, bam, 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 bam. We're going to take a pause, sit back, reflect, and I'll be looking at the last 3 episodes we've had and the information that I've taken away from it. And also we'll have people dropping in from the STA team. So I'm hoping, I think Dr. Fiona Higgs from the Women in Sports Therapy podcast will be coming along to chat with us. Gary might be here. Scott, who's doing a wonderful series of clinical videos and coffee chat mornings with the STA. I think he's popping in after rugby training. So that'll be next week. A great way to find out about the STA, join us live or listen to the podcast once it's been uploaded. And then in August, a bit of a disjointed month in August, mainly because I'm going to Cyprus for 2 weeks. So what we're going to do is the first 2 weeks of August will be Mike Grice will be at the helm. He'll be looking after the show, and he's going to be bringing guests. Dr. Claire Minchell will be around. Also, Tim Allardyce will be back as well, and they'll be having some great chats with Mike for 2 weeks. And then, like I said earlier on, in the next 3 weeks, because August is a 5-week month, I'll be back and we'll be looking. I've got some great guests lined up, and we'll be looking at the knee. Somehow, I don't think it'll be exclusion from the rest of the body, but we'll be looking, specialising in different parts of the knee, and yeah, it'll be very similar to this. But we'll be looking at some common issues and conditions you'll see, and looking at the bigger picture, turning those binoculars the proper way around instead of the wrong way around, which happens so much on courses. So I'm going to sign you guys out. Lucy and James, if you can hang around, I'm just going to shut down the live lounge, and I'll just say thank you quickly to you once we've gone.
Thank
you. Yeah, people who joined us live, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Some great questions as well. Lovely to see you in here. And people who are listening to the podcast, thank you again. It's so nice to see downloads are staying strong. I'm really, really happy about that, because it means hopefully people are listening and engaging and learning. If you want to show support for our speakers and us, then simply leave a rating. 5's always my favorite choice. And the reviews are really great as well. It takes moments if you're on an iPhone. One of the good things about an iPhone, well, in fact, probably the only good thing about an iPhone is that you can just leave a review on Apple Podcasts in seconds. If it's Android, like I say, you've got to kind of wait for full moon and go to iTunes and do something very complicated. But iPhone users, then please just go and leave a review for the Sports Therapy Association podcast. Right, that's it. I'll see you next week, people. If you join me live, take care of each other, and we'll speak soon.